But with our PECVD process, we form these columnar-shaped silicon structures. So there's an array of columns across the copper foil, and these columns are actually composed of nanoparticles, but have a micron scale structure. And this structure has porosity inside the columns and around the columns that gives the silicon room to breathe, to contain that swelling over cycling. So we've actually tried to make our cells have some lithium plating. We've charged it at ridiculous speeds, at low temperatures. So far, we've struggled to produce lithium plating under kind of reasonable conditions. So that's maybe why I'm confident that we can get to long cycle life with fast charging.
Well, today I'm really excited to introduce to you the head of battery at Dutch battery company LeydenJar, Ashley Cooke. And I'm really excited to talk about their battery technology. We've talked about other companies that are developing either 100% silicon anodes or high silicon anode batteries. And LeydenJar has a very unique process. They, number one, use a dry manufacturing process for their anodes, which of course is exciting. And then in addition, they use a technology which we'll talk about a little bit of the technical side of it. But basically, this technology creates sponge-like structures which accommodate for silicon's expansion. And with this technology, they're able to boost energy density of these batteries by 70%. And that allows for 10 times thinner anodes. And also, these batteries charge very quickly as well. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But here at the beginning of our conversation, before we really dive into this, Ashley, if you could just introduce us to yourself and maybe a little bit more about LeydenJar, things that I haven't mentioned.
As John said, I'm head of battery at LeydenJar, so I oversee the research and development on the battery side using our ultra-thin silicon anode technology. I'm originally from Oxford in the UK, and my background is in chemistry. And I joined the battery industry a decade ago, joining a lithium sulfur startup in the UK called Oxis Energy. And there I worked on electrolytes for the lithium metal anode, a very tough anode, but very promising anode in some respects. Later on, I headed that group along with working on the separator. And then later on still, I headed the cathode group. So I kind of made my journey around the cell with lithium sulfur. When that company came to a close in 2021, I was looking for the next challenge where I could bring these concepts of improving anode stability, dealing with volume changes, dealing with high resistance materials. And when I found LeydenJar, it just felt like the perfect fit. So I joined a year and a half ago. It's been a very exciting ride so far, and I'm really excited to tell you more about it. So LeydenJar was founded in 2016, originally as kind of taking technology that was designed for solar cells, and the material that was produced turned out to be a great material for batteries. Since then, we've been working to develop the technology, and now we're demonstrating very high energy densities, very fast charge rates, and cycle lives that I think most people, including myself, didn't really think were possible for 100% silicon. And I think we'll get into some of those details in this conversation.
Yeah, I think anyone who's been paying attention to battery technology, especially when you're just talking about traditional lithium-ion batteries, silicon is really the exciting element that a lot of people are trying to figure out that expansion problem. So with that thought, on your website and in the documents and stuff that you sent me, you have a process that's called plasma enhanced chemical vapor deposition, or PECVD for short. And that's the process that allows for these silicon anodes to once again have a long life, like you mentioned. We'll talk more about some specifics there, but can you walk us through and really explain this process to us? So it sounds kind of technical, sounds kind of complicated, but if you could just kind of simplify that for us and tell us what that is and how that allows for the silicon expansion.
So the PECVD, as you said, the plasma enhanced chemical vapor deposition, it is quite complex, but in some ways it's also very simple, and I'll try and make that clear. So we have this machine. It's a big vacuum chamber where you put in your copper roll, and this is your current collector, similar copper that you would find in lithium-ion cells today. You unspool that copper through this vacuum chamber, and you inject gases. The main active gas being silane, which is where we will get the silicon from, and along with some carrier gases, you ignite a plasma across the foil, and this allows a reaction at the surface of the copper, which deposits your silicon. And so it's a one-step process. You put in copper rolls, and out comes a complete silicon anode that's ready for cutting, ready for putting into your batteries.
That's really a unique process there. I was going to ask separately about the dry anode manufacturing. Traditionally, that sounds way different than any kind of dry manufacturing process that I've ever heard. So there's that particular process. It's just a gas process, and there's not actually any liquids involved there at all. From what I hear.
As you said, like the incumbent technology for anode production is where you make a mixture, you make slurries, you coat it, you dry it, you calender it. But in our process, it's just copper foil, silane, and a couple of other gases, and using plasma to make this reaction on the copper surface. And it's a completely dry process, giving you the resultant anode. It's a process that I think it's been around since like the 60s. It's been seen widespread use in the solar industry and for silicon thin films. We're just kind of hacking it to a different purpose now to make silicon anodes.
Yeah, so it's actually encouraging that it's a mature technology in that sense, not in this application, but in other applications. So you're not like you creating this new process. So that's definitely encouraging for scalability, which also we'll talk about more. Before we move on, I recently became an affiliate for one of my favorite brands, Real Mushrooms, who is the maker of 100% organic mushroom extracts, including this 5 Defenders blend, which I regularly take. And unlike many other mushroom products on the market, Real Mushroom extracts, like the 5 Defenders blend that I use, are made from the mushroom fruiting body itself without a bunch of fillers, which help maximize the amount of active compounds that you're actually getting in the powder. Right now, if you click the link that I've put in the video description, for your first purchase, if you click that link, it'll actually load in a coupon that will save you 25% off that first purchase. And if you purchase from that link, Real Mushrooms actually gives me a commission as well, which helps support this channel. So go over and check out their products and click that link in the video description to lock in that 25% coupon for your first purchase. How does this deal with silicon's expansion problems? And talk about the sponge-like structures. What are we talking about there when we talk about sponge-like structures? How does that make a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like, okay, we use this new process. It's completely dry. It's a one-step process, but what other benefits does it have? Because as we'll come to, I think scalability is a challenge that we have to reckon with. But part of the benefit is the types of silicon structures that you can create, which are very, very difficult, if not impossible, to create with traditional slurry processes, to deal with the expansion problem of silicon, which I think most of your viewers are probably aware of. But silicon expands a lot during cycling, and that can cause breaking up of the particles, and you lose capacity and performance. But with our PECVD process, we form these columnar-shaped silicon structures. So there's an array of columns across the copper foil, and these columns are actually composed of nanoparticles, but have a micron scale structure. And this structure has porosity inside the columns and around the columns that gives the silicon room to breathe, to contain that swelling over cycling. And that's kind of the secret sauce behind LeydenJar's technology.
Very good. Okay, let's move over to energy density. As far as your test cells right now, the cells that you're building, can you discuss a little bit about the energy density metrics that you've been able to achieve so far? And I'd like you to talk about both volumetric and gravimetric, because I think I only saw volumetric in your material. So I'd like to know both. And if you could kind of talk about that a bit.
Yeah, we definitely focus more on volumetric. Our first target market is really into consumer electronics, and volumetric is really the number one metric there, as well as it is for EVs. And also our advantage with this super thin silicon is really in volumetric. So we have demonstrated at stack level above 1200 watt hours per liter, comfortably above 1200 watt hours per liter. But the key here that I really want to make clear with you and your audience is what is the meaning of stack level? It's a industry accepted way of comparing different chemistries, because at the moment we are making quite small cells to demonstrate the technology at the chemistry level. So typically you could reduce that by 20–30% to get to what you would expect at the cell level. So that'd be 1200 watt hours per liter stack level, maybe around 1000 watt hours per liter for cell level for volumetric. Just to finish off the volumetric side, we often will, because of this difficulty in comparing different chemistries and the games that are played in this industry, unfortunately, sometimes it's easier just to get the customers or interested parties to have a think about yourself. If current graphite anodes are about 50% of the volume of cells, and around 100 to 120 microns, what happens if you reduce that anode coating thickness to about 10 microns, which is what we're doing at LeydenJar? And you can already imagine the big gains in volumetric energy that can be achieved. On gravimetric energy density, I'd say we're close to 400 watt hours per kilogram on the stack level. But gravimetric is a lot easier, just to look at how much energy it has, put it on a balance. And so this year, our aim is to produce 5 amp hour cells at 330 watt hours per kilogram at the cell level. And that's what we're working really hard to do at the moment. So that would be something like this size, going from our current size, which is kind of a business card sized.
Very good. Yeah, that'd be good, and a very nice cell at 330 watt hours per kilogram, because I mean, the 4680 battery technology is like around a little bit below 250, very likely, watt hours per kilogram. So definitely that's a good next step for something like that. So very respectable. And obviously there's probably more room to improve from there, but that's very respectable.
Thanks. So, yeah. And maybe just another point on this is, there's a typical trade-off between energy density and power performance. So normally the higher energy density you go, the lower your power performance. But one of the reasons we've targeted this around 330 mark is that we believe we can still deliver extremely high power performance, very short charging times, while also representing a decent step forward in terms of the total gravimetric energy density. Obviously, the silicon technology allows for a lot of that. And allows for that. I'm sure the thin anodes themselves actually play a lot to that as well. It's easier for those ions to move in to that silicon. So, of course, definitely. So you talked about cell capacities. You talked about moving to a 5 amp hour cell. What does it look like, when you make an automotive size cell, and you talked about 330 watt hours per kilogram? If you're making an automotive sized battery pouch, one that would go into a battery pack, would you still say with your current technology you could be hitting
over 300 watt hours per kilogram, somewhere around 1,000 watt hours per liter, or does that add a lot more packing material and that completely changes the metric?
It's a great question. So normally, as you scale up in capacity, your stack level that we talked about, this kind of chemistry level versus the real cell level, that gap becomes smaller and smaller because the weight of the packaging becomes a smaller fraction of the cell. At the moment, we think we could push further towards 400 watt hours per kilogram, especially as we develop our technology over the coming years. I should be clear though that will be some years off, and our first aim is to get into the market in consumer electronics or drones. But of course, the big goal at the end would be to get into EVs with something close to 400 watt hours per kilogram would be what we'd like to aim for, I think.
It's very encouraging. Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. Obviously, you can't just jump straight into electric vehicles. That's good that you kind of set that expectation a little bit. But yeah, you have to walk a little bit before you run, and you have to do the smaller battery cells before you do the big ones. Definitely, for sure. But it's encouraging that it seems like that, it's scalable to that size with a very impressive energy density that I believe even 5-6 years from now will still be right there where it needs to be. So that's good to hear. Now let's go ahead and move over and let's talk about cycle life. So I was sent a presentation, and I saw in that presentation that you demonstrated greater than 450 cycles to end of life, which in that presentation said an 80% capacity retaining at that point. Within that, can you talk about some of what that entails as far as, okay, what charge rate, what was the charging that cycle life is achieved at? And how does that compare to a normal battery, and what charging parameters were for that life cycle?
That was carried out with our standard internal kind of testing C rates, which is C/2. So roughly a 2-hour charge, 2-hour discharge. And we worked incredibly hard to get to over 450 cycles. It's at room temperature. It's with off-the-shelf NMC 622. There's no extra lithium put in via pre-lithiation, and it's under comparatively low 50 psi, but we're working to reduce that as well. I'd like to kind of maybe put in context as well what 450 cycles really means for a company like LeydenJar. If you were to put all the silicon companies on a continuum of how much silicon they've got in their system, you'd find a big cluster around 3 to 5%, then fewer still at 10%, 20%, 50%. At LeydenJar, we really are using pure silicon. There's no carbon, there's no binder, there's no wire structures. It really is copper and silicon. And when I joined LeydenJar, I was optimistic, but there's a big question on whether we could get to cycle lives that were relevant for consumer electronics, which is 400 to 500 cycles. And last year, we were really happy to report those results. So I think it shows that our bet on this technology so far, with this unique structure and way of making the silicon, is so far is going in the right direction.
Do you see a path forward with faster charge rates? So let's say getting a 10 to 80% charge in 30 minutes in that kind of scale, and maybe even faster. Will this technology, do you see the path to that happening with still a 500 or so cycle life or greater? What's that path look like?
That's a very astute question, because we've now demonstrated we can fast charge our silicon anodes. Again, against most people's expectations, when you don't have carbon, don't have any conductive additives, it's just silicon, which is known to be a semiconductor. How fast can you charge it? So we also showed last year we could charge to 60% in less than 10 minutes. But the reason your question is astute is, can you do that repeatedly without causing huge damage to your cell, without causing lithium plating? And to be honest, we're still testing the boundaries of where we can push the technology. In the medium term, I don't have any doubt that we could have regular fast charging and above 500 cycles with this technology. There's no reason why that couldn't be the case.
So you don't think there has to be changes to the technology to get where really you need to be above 1,000 in the future? So I don't know when that is in the future, but do you think you have to add something to your technology? Since it sounds pretty basic. It doesn't sound like there's a lot to change on it. Fundamentally, are you going to have to add something to your technology, do you believe, to get there in the future?
Yeah, well, maybe let's think about why fast charging causes rapid failure in graphite. Very briefly, it's because of two things. It's because graphite is incredibly thick, which can, as you're trying to fill it with lithium very quickly during charging, it gets congested and causes lithium dendrites on the surface. And the second reason is that, without being too technical, the plating potential for graphite is very close to the plating potential for lithium. Now, those two things, thickness and the potential, we've now reduced the thickness of our electrode from the thickness of a human hair, which sounds already very thin, that's graphite, down to about the size of a human red blood cell. That's the thickness of our anode. It's quite hard to, well, I find it sometimes hard to really understand these scales, but that's really what we're talking about. So the thickness is not an issue. On the potential of silicon is inherently further away from lithium plating. So we've actually tried to make our cells have some lithium plating. We've charged it at ridiculous speeds, at low temperatures. So far, we've struggled to produce lithium plating under kind of reasonable conditions. So that's maybe why I'm confident that we can get to long cycle life with fast charging, but needs a little bit of final tweaks.
What is the failure mechanism that really leads to the end of life for your batteries? What is it that's happening? Is it the expansion? It just eventually breaks apart enough. Even the sponge-like structures can't hold it enough, and that's what ends it. That's why you have 80% or less after that 450. Like, what is the actual mechanism in the battery? What's happening? What's breaking down for it to be at end of life?
I don't want anybody to come away from this, from watching this video, to think that we've solved every single problem. So we are definitely working on trying to improve the cycle life beyond 400, beyond 500. Internally, we're already showing some big leaps, but we want to make sure we're confident in that data. And the failure mechanism for our anodes is not cracking or breakup of the anode. It's, from our analysis, it's really still that the silicon is having continuous side reactions with the liquid electrolyte during cycling. So part of our design direction is to try and minimize the amount of surface area that sees electrolyte, because any time the anode sees electrolyte, it will want to react, especially have new surfaces being formed as it expands and contracts. So we've not fully eliminated that. To get to 450 cycles, we've minimized that. And to push beyond, there's a few aspects that we're looking at where we think we can reduce that yet further.
Okay, well, that actually gives me hope for the future. And I believe that really piggybacks nice off of the last comments of, so it's the electrolytes and the side reactions and things like that that are really the limiting factor here, and not the actual technology, the PECVD product or PECVD process. It's not the silicon itself that's a limiting factor here. It's the side reaction. So that does give me hope that in the future, since you explained that it's not the anode itself that's the limiting factor in the fast charging and the breakdown, and there's no lithium plating problem, et cetera, I feel like you can solve that in the future. That's a good, encouraging way to move on. So
maybe I just want to make sure we're kind of
Yeah.
on the same page with
Yes.
this point. The side reactions are on the anode, and so the silicon does react with the electrolyte. It's kind of takes two to tango, if you will. But there's some compelling techniques on the ways we could reduce that in the future by designing the structure to avoid contact with the electrolyte, by using new electrolytes that are less reactive, or by pre-lithiation in the future as an interesting method that some people are exploring.
Well, I appreciate everything that you've talked about here in the technology. As we close the conversation, I would like to talk a little bit about actually manufacturing this product in the future. And so we'll start with talk a little bit about the pilot facility that you have now, what you're doing there, what kind of scale you're seeing, what kind of battery cells you're building there, and then talk a little bit about your roadmap. I believe you have plans in the future for Plant 1 and Plant 2. So if you could talk about pilot, Plant 1 and Plant 2, rough roadmap, rough scale, kind of what your future looks like.
So we're based in the Netherlands. I'm in Leiden, where most of the battery team and the support staff are. But in Eindhoven is also actually where a lot of the magic happens. That's where our pilot facility to produce these anodes is. Eindhoven is a famous area as the birthplace of ASML and Philips, and has a very strong manufacturing and technology background. And there we've been developing our anodes using this pilot scale piece of equipment, which is in the kind of kilowatt hour scale, like hundreds of kilowatt hours. And that machine is kind of taken from the originally intended for solar industry, but we've learned so much with that machine. And now we're designing our own tooling, really getting involved in the design and understanding, hired some of the greatest minds in engineering and plasma, because we see that this is the real key to whether LeydenJar wins or loses. And I think we're setting ourselves up really well now to hopefully be a winner on that. In December last year, we announced 30 million in funding from the European Investment Bank, which allows us now to build our Plant 1 facility, which is going to be 100 megawatt hours. So huge step forward for us, increasing the scalability as we continue to drive down costs, increase uptime, optimize the process, learn about the supply chain, and really develop our plasma technologies in that line, whilst also being able to serve our first customers, perhaps in the consumer electronics or the drone markets. And we've got a number of projects with some top tier customers in those markets already, who are excited to sample our product. So that will start producing very soon and should be fully operational by 2026. And by the end of the decade, we're already planning for a Plant 2, which will be 4 gigawatt hours. And so representing another big step forward in terms of the scale, and we can bring down the cost, again, optimize the performance and quality of the anode, and start to deliver it to wider and wider markets with this ultra thin silicon anode.
Very exciting. Well, that's an exciting roadmap for your company, and excited to follow your progress. And I appreciate all the great information that you've shared with us. Just to close the conversation, is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with, something that we didn't mention, something you'd like to talk about? And also, how would you like my audience to either connect with you or connect with the company?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of the interesting parts. Maybe a thing that I've learned from working at LeydenJar is at this scale, with 100% silicon, I felt like I've had to relearn a lot of what I thought was possible. There are certainly lots of challenges to come for LeydenJar, and we are not shy about facing those challenges. And I'm confident we can solve lots of those key challenges. I'm really excited to see what we'll be able to come up with. If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, you can find me, Ashley Cooke, LeydenJar. Drop me an email if you'd like to hear more, or if you see some job vacancies that look appealing to you, I invite you to come to the Netherlands. It's a beautiful place. They're lovely people, and it's been an amazing time working here so far.
Very cool. Ashley, thanks again for your time, and I appreciate everything you shared with us.
Thanks, John. Great speaking to you. And maybe we can catch up again sometime.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for watching that interview. I hope you enjoyed it. Do let me know what you think about that conversation that we had in the comments section below. And also, I want to say a special thank you to those who support me through Patreon. Your support really makes a big difference and helps make these videos possible. A special thank you to my performance supporters and also the other supporters listed on the screen. If you'd like to find out more about the Patreon community I've set up and how you can support my work, I'll put a link in the video description. Thank you so much.